and Netflix.
Well, so Fate has been cancelled. It's a mess. Well, that's just another Winx product that can line up and get in the bin. This is getting a bit tiring now. You can't keep digging the girlies out of their graves every few years only to chuck them back in there when it doesn't work out. Oddly enough, I was of the ilk after getting over my initial irritation with the show as an adaptation and its flaws, who managed to accept season 1 as it was and get interested in the setups that it introduced. Only to get massive whiplash when the show committed to none of them in this half-hearted course correction that was season 2. More about it here. My goal in this video is to try to rework in some of those older setups, some plots from the original series, and just inject some more Winx into the whole affair. I'm just kidding, there are no goals in this video. I just mess around with everything based on my whims and my whims alone. In my rewrite of the first season, apart from my propositions for a season 2, I was staying close to the story, just shifting some names and titles around to make it a little more Winxy. This time, because I'm no longer emotionally bound by a trust that this story is going anywhere, I just went crazy. Some of these propositions are completely divorced from the show. Maybe you will even think that they're too much of a bastardization of the Winx canon. I don't really know. But you know, I had fun making it. All of these suggestions kind of work with my previous suggestions too, such as Princess Aisha and Queen Cassandra. Just to be clear, this is by no means a video on how it should have been done. This is just me going wild. This is basically fanfiction. Enjoy. So, one of my big issues with this season, as I mentioned in my review, was that Flora was just superimposed onto the story. She had no life and stakes of her own, no relationship to speak of with the other girls, and she brought no fresh energy to the plot. And all of this, despite Mr. Young insisting that her presence was intended all along. Sure, Brian.
Good job, sweetie.
In order to counteract this, also inspired a little by Aisha's entrance in season 2, I propose starting off the season not with the specialist party in the woods, but with a Flora prologue. It is Flora who is in the forest, battered, alone, running away from creatures unknown, with the silhouette of a man observing in the distance. Perhaps a swish of powers is what reveals to us, the audience, that this is indeed our darling flower fairy, before a scraper launches itself at the camera. I would have this as the main source of tension at the beginning of the first episode. Flora's arrival has been expected for some time, but she is missing. Perhaps Rosalind has been cruelly indifferent, refusing to help look for her. As I covered in my review, there's a bizarre mismatch between Rosalind's behaviour and what characters say of her in the first part of the season. One of the main sources of this is her seemingly caring nature. Yes, most of her caretaking is actually just a manipulation tactic, but without a proper baseline, it's not obvious enough to be sinister. Her callousness towards the disappearance of Flora could be the baseline for her behaviour. She does not care as long as it does not impact her immediate concerns. It can also be the main reason for Sam's disdain and contempt towards her, instead of his weird anti-establishment thing he has going. This is a military school. Why do you pretend to be shocked by this? If the missing student is not just passingly mentioned ex-students, but someone close to a main character, immediately the danger is more palpable. Immediately, Althea feels more like the dangerous, harsh environment the characters insist that it is. The next time we see Flora, it is at the end of episode 1, a la Devon or a la Aisha. I know this feels like it changes the plot a lot, but it really doesn't have to. Terra manages to revive Flora by the second episode, so that we have plenty of time to spend with her, and the source of the tension comes not from, oh no, whoops, Devon goes into cardiac arrest, but the horror of Flora having lost her powers. Overall, I feel that this makes the first half of the season tighter and gives the protagonists more time and focus, rather than distracting with characters and plot lines that don't get developed. My vision for Flora would be that she spends the season without her powers to be restored at the end, giving more time, aesthetically, for Terra's power shift to minerals, and perhaps eventually, since minerals are super important for technology, Technology? Throughout the season, Flora is focused on chemistry and herbal remedies for which she doesn't necessarily need her powers. Perhaps Rosalind has a clinical interest in her condition, which we can also use to explain away why she is allowed to remain at the school. Her vulnerable state means that she is forced to be much more emotionally dependent and intimate in her relationships with the girls. Perhaps Stella quietly empathizes with her given her own predicament. Flora's loss of powers creates more urgency for the girls to research the scrapers, instead of this all being Bloom's initiative, once again allowing Flora's presence to energize the plot. Finally, instead of this weird plotline over ribbon and Terra thinking that there's been something wrong with her, I would just much rather this was positioned in the story as Terra discovering this new side to herself with the loving encouragement of her cousin, and through a budding wholesome romance with Kat, which I would start developing earlier on in the season. The whole scene where Terra came out, it felt like homophobia must be a thing in the other world given the language she uses. And we don't need that. Why do we need fantasy homophobia? I would just have this romance as a respite in what is otherwise quite a dark season. Kat is super charismatic, and I like this pairing. Anyway, we'll be back to these two in a bit. After Flora's prologue, I would open the season with Bloom fighting against Stella. Stella and Bloom are fighting as part of the demonstration, and we can see that despite Bloom trying to pretend that she isn't as strong as she is, she's having to get more serious about it because Stella truly has grown in power. It makes sense to me that out of all of the girls, Stella would be the one to thrive under Rosalind's style of teaching. Rosalind advocates for surrendering to instinct and emotion.
You've been taught to control them. That isn't always the best option.
Stella's palace education has been based on exploiting her negative emotions, and she has proven in the past that she is capable of summoning great amounts of magic. Further, Stella's source of magic has not been explored yet. She has not been established as drawing from any of the 5 elements introduced in Season 1. For the context of this reimagining, I would rework in an idea that was introduced in Season 1 of Winx, that Stella's powers may actually derive from the dragon flame. If you're familiar with Winx lore, you know that the god of the Winxverse, the great dragon, appeared out of nothing and breathed the stars into existence. The stars, the suns, therefore, are made up of the dragon flame, and in a way, as the Sun Princess, Stella derived her powers from this primordial essence. This was why Beatrix initially suspected that the key to the dragon flame was held in the Solarian scepter. Now, in Fate, Stella controls light, what people see, and not necessarily sun powers. I've seen some people argue that she may actually be kind of like a mind fairy, which is a cool concept. But for the sake of this reimagining, let's say that her powers indeed somehow derive from the dragon flame, but are not the dragon flame directly. And this is important for 2 reasons, first of which will become apparent later. But additionally, I think it's important that Stella firstly have grown significantly in power, and secondly, that the dragon flame isn't this random disconnected thing that's introduced all of a sudden. This, combined with the plotline I will introduce for Aisha, will help even out the power distribution and get rid of the justification for the one-woman army routine Bloom has throughout this story, where she keeps insisting on doing everything by herself, and is narratively justified for it because she is indeed the one true special chosen Dragonflame fairy. I want to deprive the story of this, because it firstly doesn't work in the context of a story about multiple protagonists. All of the girls should be able to contribute to the plot, instead of Bloom saving the world by herself whilst the others are having what all basically amounts to relationship drama. Now don't get me wrong, Bloom is still the main character and I don't actually have a problem with her having this unique primordial power. But consider how Winx did it. Indeed, Bloom was very powerful, and her power was unique to her given that everyone from her planet sharing her magical essence was lost. However, whilst her power itself was unique and all-defeating, Bloom was held back by her own limited ability. In Season 1, she is the weakest of the girls because she is not as well trained as they are. There is work to be done in perfecting your powers. And in Season 3, she is the last to achieve Enchantix and spends most of the season grappling with the possibility that she may never achieve the final fairy form. When she does, admittedly through circumstances completely unique to herself, it is incomplete. So whilst through all this, her magical essence is the most powerful amongst the girls, her ability is not necessarily, which means that the other girls are allowed the space to have much bigger roles to play. So yes, in giving Stella and later Aisha more enhanced powers, narratively we strip the plot of the justification for Bloom's solo hijinks. The significant moments can now be more evenly distributed. More on this in a bit. Sebastian, oh Sebastian, the Terrier. I know some people might not like this, but my plan for this character is to blend the storylines of Valtor and the Wizards of the Black Circle. When I was first watching the show, I thought that a Wizards of the Black Circle type situation was what they were going for. I mean, Sebastian is literally stealing fairy magic, and he has this black circle. Nah. I really feel like they did themselves a disservice by evoking Valtor when Ogron was sitting right there. They could have fixed so much of this situation by just slapping a different name on this character. The Wizards of the Black Circle are the quirkier of the villain lineup anyway, and given that we never really get to know any of the other Blood Witches, the plot would have been better off with Sebastian as a standalone with a few flunkies. Maybe Grey himself could have been one of the bunch. Duman or Guntlos, maybe. I don't know. But look, there are a few things I have to commit to, and if we want the Trix, well, Valtor makes sense. So put this man in a wig, shove him in some Victoriana, and maybe he now runs an antiquarian bookshop for ancient magical texts instead of retro Earth stuff. This actor is clearly very talented, so I really think he could have pulled it off. This storyline of stealing fairy magic or magical essence isn't out of character for Valtor either, so all the elements for fully committing to this characterization are there. So let's say Valtor grew up in Astadel, perhaps the descendant of a coven of witches who made it their mission to steal fairy magic, especially the dragon flame, for themselves, before getting destroyed along with Astadel during a burnt one attack organized by Rosalind. See, this works either way. Instead of attacking Althea with all these other blood witches whose motivations we never really had time to explore, perhaps he blood magics the population of Blackbridge, Valtor, and Cloud Tower, so that he has an army with which to attack Althea. The only really big change I would make to his storyline would be that he doesn't die at the end of the season, but retreats after suffering a defeat at the hands of the Winx. This way, the time we wasted on Rosalind would feel less underwhelming, and this villain could also get some development maybe in a third season. And most importantly, what I want to do is to reassemble a Trix under him, once again to be further explored in imagined future seasons. And I would really prefer to do this out of existing characters, since we haven't really had time to properly get to know, well, just about anyone yet. Fair warning, I'm about to mess up both Fate and Winx canon. So yes, I'm doubling down on the proposition of my first ever video that Musa really ought to have been Darcy. And fair warning, if you really like Musa exactly as she is, I'm about to butcher it, you've been warned. I think that a villain arc isn't unnatural for a character like Fate Musa. Like I said in that first video, Musa is a mind fairy who doesn't have the best relationship with her powers. In Season 1, we see Musa being frustrated that her powers don't have much active combat potential, but later she has the ability to take Sam's pain away, meaning she has the ability to manipulate the senses, like, say, Darcy. And honestly, on my first watch of this season, I thought to myself, is that what we're getting? Are they going there? Early in this season, it is established that Musa now has much better control over her powers. She is messing around with people's emotions and is seemingly pretty careless about it. She doesn't think much of it, but ultimately thinks she is doing a good thing. Instead of being horrified with herself and her powers after her confrontations with Terra and Sam, I would instead have her become frustrated with them and amplify her feeling of being misunderstood. She is just now making progress, making peace with her powers that she struggled with all her life, finally feeling useful for once. And people are ungrateful? They think it's wrong of her? Well, what was she supposed to have done? Maybe she continues to feel that she was holding back Sam from something horrific instead of exacerbating the situation. I know that people enjoyed the concept of Musa voluntarily giving up her powers. It is certainly interesting, and it would have been interesting to see where they took it. However, I can't help but feel that in a story where there's already such a distinct lack of magic, it is incredibly frustrating for a character to give up their powers. It makes perfect sense in a real-world sense. Being overly empathetic sucks, but it's kind of a frustrating choice in terms of a series about magic and fairies and witches for the character with the most interesting powers to give up said powers. And in my opinion, there's another interesting aspect of being overly empathetic that you could explore while staying in the realm of magical beings. Being overly empathetic as a potential villainizing point. So yes, I would predicate Musa's villain arc on her inability to negotiate and reconcile her powers in relation to others, with Terra being louder in voicing objections from the start of the season. She is sorry about Sam having to leave, but is also bitter and frustrated that Terra won't acknowledge that she was just trying to help. Perhaps in a moment of frustration after the feast, she wanders off into the woods and is attacked and kidnapped. At this point, perhaps as part of a bait and switch, I would put a montage of Musa being tormented by visions of Astadel, seeing the suffering, the torture, the pain, and all of it caused by the fairies' war on the Blood Witches. And at this point, we later understand she overly empathizes with Sebastian. Perhaps during the partial transfer of her magic to him, they forge a mental connection, and she is converted to his side. She has empathized with his perspective to the point where she has appropriated it. His cause, revenge against fairies, is justified in her empathetic mind, and she has found renewed purpose for her powers within this. From this point on, the rest is largely Beatrix's storyline. Musa has disappeared, Terra thinks it's because she is rightfully ashamed of what she did to Sam. Bloom finds out that actually she was taken by scrapers, but keeps it to herself. During the party, Stella, perhaps hanging out with Beatrix, receives a text from Musa. The sweet girls set out to find her. She is brought back to Althea by Ribbon. Terra is the one who is by her side when she fakes having lost her powers, and forgives her because, well, that's sufficient punishment. Musa can also still grow close to Ribbon through this. She is now the one who betrays the school and lets Sebastian in toward the end. You get the idea. This new plotline would allow for Aisha, who has gathered some goodwill in the fandom, to continue to participate, whilst creating an opportunity to correct this casting decision. I guess as a final note, we could get the reveal at the end that Musa's surname is Darcy. Darcy spelt like this is supposed to be a surname anyway. Having taken away the magic deprivation plot from Beatrix, we now have more time to explore the dynamic between her, Sky, and Andreas. As we see at the start of the season, Andreas is indeed a good parent to Beatrix, and not completely emotionally inadept. It is only natural that there is some distance between Sky and Andreas, but we slowly see them growing closer as father and son. Andreas and Silver reconcile, and observing this allows Sky to forgive Silver for his well-intentioned lies. Maybe through this new bond, Andreas turns to the good side, maybe Sky gets two daddies. At any rate, there is potential here, you can have fun with it. And I liked Andreas as actor, so he gets to stick around somehow. Perhaps in observing all of this, Beatrix's desperation to learn the truth of her past is exacerbated. The orphaned fairy is feeling threatened by her adoptive father's newfound relationship with his biological son, and turns elsewhere in despair for a sense of belonging and identity. These feelings can be explored through her conversations with Stella. We love Stella Trix. She turns to Rosalind for this promised origin story from Season 1. As I mentioned before, I originally thought that Beatrix was going to be a Blood Witch, since in Season 1 she seems to think that she originates from Astadel. So my theory a couple of episodes into this season was that Beatrix was a Blood Witch who had been given stolen powers as a baby. And this is why Rosalind gave her to Andreas instead of leaving her in the first world like Bloom, because she suspected her powers were ill-gotten and thought someone ought to keep an eye on her. And while that wasn't the case, but I actually really like this idea, so I'm running with it. Rosalind at some point reveals to Beatrix that she is in fact a witch, a former resident of Astadel. Her powers were given to her in her infancy and in fact belong to a fairy trapped in the Black Circle. The Black Circle is a dimension used by Blood Witches for, among other things, imprisoning the fairies they drain so that they can use their powers indefinitely. This is partially inspired by how Rosalind tells Bloom that if you put someone in stasis, you can use their powers. Rosalind reveals to Beatrix that she's kept her around all these years because she is the key to this dimension, which also houses people precious to her. Which is Rosalind's origin story for why she really hated the witches of Astadel specifically, yet seems to tolerate others. This new fairy, by the way, is a blend of Nebula and Musa. Let's call her Lisa. An opportunity to correct the whitewashing in the cast. She is an air fairy whose specialty was sound. As we know from the show, if you kill the person who has stolen your powers will be restored back to you. So, Rosalind perhaps reveals to Beatrix that her plan is to eventually kill her so that Lisa on the other side can use her powers to break out the fairies trapped in the Black Circle. Beatrix, horrified, not wanting to lose her life or her powers, follows Rosalind from the castle to the graveyard. She is the one to kill Rosalind instead of Bloom, incinerating her with lightning whilst Bloom is confronting her about the death of Farah, and proceeds to disappear. Beatrix has already killed once for much less, so it's not unfeasible that she might again, and I would just keep Bloom's hands clean. Because Rosalind has been burned to a crisp, the murder gets blamed on Bloom. To keep Andreas's characterization as a soldier loyal to the end intact, perhaps it is he who especially pushes for Bloom's incarceration. It is he who especially believes in her guilt in murdering his former commander, because unknowing of what Beatrix has learned, he thinks her incapable of this treason. This can further bring some spicy tension to the plot, since Skye is looped into it too. Maybe because Stella has grown close to Beatrix, she too doesn't quite believe Bloom that Beatrix was the one who killed Rosalind, but is still keen to defend Bloom at her trial and is the one to encourage a self-defense strategy, setting Flora and Terra on the task of trying to locate Farah's corpse. The trial goes catastrophically as it does in the show, with the revelation that Stella considered her position opportune next to Bloom, and that Grey is secretly a blood witch, completely derailing the trial. We are later made to understand that Beatrix has joined up with Sebastian, maybe taking Dane with her so he has something to do as well, poor Dane. I really disliked the flip-flopping around Beatrix's personality this season, and I feel like this way I give her the opportunity to be consistently evil, yet give the audience space to sympathize with her. It feels a bit more consistent to her characterization from last season. Okay. So here's what I'm thinking. Hear me out. Gender-bent Icy? Again, I really would like to reconstruct my Trix out of extant cast so that we have more time to get to know the characters we've already established. One thing Trix always had over some other villains was how they kept it personal with all the Winx instead of just Bloom. And in this way, we have personal tension between Musa as Darcy and Terra, Beatrix as Stormy and Stella, and Grey as Icy and Aisha, upping the stakes for future storylines. At some point, Grey receives some air powers, or perhaps he had them all along, and we now have the complete trio, with Grey as the leader being the one most naturally close with Sebastian. Their dynamics again are for the future. As far as this season, we can keep his storyline as it is, but perhaps leave his intentions around his pursuit of Aisha more ambiguous. I know that Grey lacks Icy's bitter edge, that chip on her shoulder, but maybe this is something he can achieve through riffing off of the other two in the future. Being around Beatrix seems to spark that in people. I'm actually pretty pleased with this Trix construction. I don't know how anyone else is going to feel about it, but it sets up some interesting dynamics in my opinion. Beatrix and Grey's powers being especially fallible given that they are not their own, Musa being a true-born fairy among blood witches, and the potential inner circle conflict emerging from that, an opportunity to get further into Sebastian's justifications through the empathetic eye of Musa. You set out to give us an adult show, and it should follow that there is a lot more moral grey zone. Or at least it could. Finally, Aisha. So for this section, I was inspired by the idea of the enchanting sacrifice and trying to make the power distribution more even. In episode 7, 3 of the girls, Terra, Aisha, and Stella, also achieved transformation. Unfortunately, since the explanation why was really underwhelming and the circumstances don't quite compare to Bloom's circumstances in season 1, this feels really unearned. The whole in-universe novelty of transformation is lost. Remember, unlike in Winx, in Fate, this is a really unique thing. I would like to fix this by only letting one of the girls achieve a full transformation and tie the reasoning more closely to the idea of a great sacrifice. which is kind of the case for Bloom in Season 1. So let's talk about Aisha this season for a second. Was it better? Well, it was certainly on the nose. Most of Aisha's plotline this season revolved around her romance with Grey, her tentative first venture into love with the support of Musa and Flora. As far as individual plotlines go, though, romance is the lazier approach, so I was happy to see some crumbs of her relationship with Flora. Flora's bubbly romance angel to Aisha's reserved high-stress bunny was cute, and I felt that their relationship felt quite organic compared to others, especially given that Flora didn't really get to interact with anyone else. It was also reminiscent of Aisha and Flora's plotline in Season 2 of the series, where Aisha was wingmanning Flora in her romance with Helia. You know, I'm here for the crumbs. One thing I would have liked to have seen is the development of her relationship with Stella. Last season, they really did not gel, and it would have been interesting to see them overcome that and have moments together. We still don't get the sense that they are very close this season, and they're developing a tentative alliance. Well, I was hoping that's where it was going to go. So what I would like to do is both give Stella and Aisha an important moment together, and to give Aisha a moment of her own. So here is how it goes. Flora and Terra figure out that the plant thing is actually hosting Farah's essence. Terra and Flora only let Bloom out of stasis with the help of Farah and head out of Althea down to the ruined old house. We don't have the transformation conversation just yet. Instead, Farah warns of the oncoming invasion and of adders in the nest. Flora leaves to inform the girls at Althea of what has happened. Bloom and Farah have a heartfelt conversation whilst Terra keeps lookout, and then Farah disintegrates away. Don't worry, she'll be back. Musa is the one to let Sebastian into the school, and Beatrix and Grey with him. Already, we can sense some tension among them. Musa does not like what Grey is doing to Aisha, and Beatrix feels threatened by Musa given that she is a trueborn fairy, just establishing their dynamics for imagined oncoming seasons. From here on, Flora takes what was Musa's place in the plot, and Aisha, Flora's. During the initial invasion of the school by scrapers, Flora is left free in the corridors, invisible for her lack of powers. Aisha is captured and thrown to the cells. As for Stella, newly free of the limitations of the gem, she is back to her full powers. As the scrapers rampage through the school, we see Stella cornered and under attack. Now remember how I said I would make it so that Stella's powers derive from the dragon flame? Bloom is still the one true dragon fairy, but Stella has some of the same benefits, such as, the scrapers not being able to host dragon magic. Stella, to her own surprise, manages to fry the scraper attacking her. I don't think this is inappropriate as a plotline or power to give to Stella, since it also provides an origin story for the Solarian monarchy. If the royals derived their power from this ancient primordial essence, it could explain how they came to be in charge, why Solaria is the most powerful realm in the other world, etc. And it doesn't have to detract from Bloom's story or powers, since Bloom is much, much older anyway. Perhaps the first Queen of Solaria was a disciple of Marian's and part of the Company of Light or something. I don't know, it could be fun lore. Sky falls under Sebastian's blood magic and is used to lure Bloom back to the school. Terra gets a big speech moment. All of that mostly remains the same. One change though is, instead of Bloom voluntarily giving up her powers, I would make it so that Sebastian is baiting Bloom, taunting her with stories about her past, her mother, her history, just like Valtor does in Season 3, threatening to harm Sky and then absorbing her attacks through the crystal, a la Ogron. This would have been a way of making that scene more dynamic instead of them just standing around for a good 2 or 3 hours. Since I have an unlimited budget for this reimagining, I could even make it so that Bloom is doing this whilst flying around in full transformation outfit and all.
People are going hungry because you're making them spend all their money on outfits.
Meanwhile, Aisha, Flora and Stella manage to regroup and realize the potential of Stella's power. They hatch a plan to draw all the scrapers to one location to fry them all, eventually coming up with the idea of the pheromone, which Flora is able to prepare. After a lot of hesitation, Aisha manages to convince them that the simplest way is for her to volunteer to do this. So with no time to waste, they spread the magical pheromone around the school, and Aisha uses her powers to draw the scrapers to herself, unsure if she will lose her powers as a result or not. The scrapers attack, Stella produces a great wave of force, but it is not enough to fry all the scrapers. Under this moment of great stress, Aisha suddenly achieves Enchantix. I don't know, is this too cheesy? I told you this was basically fanfiction. The combined strength of Aisha's now enhanced powers and Stella's magic manages to overwhelm the Scrapers. From here on, the three regroup with Terra and then head for Bloom. It largely plays out the same, with all of them attacking Sebastian, but with only Aisha and Bloom in full transformation. The attack manages to defeat but not kill Sebastian, and he escapes with the New Trix in tow. Bloom revives Sky with her special healing powers so that some of the uniqueness of her powers is restored. This isn't inappropriate even in Fate, because it's kind of suggested that she has healing powers in Season 1. Rather than this happy jolly end to the battle, the Winx girls are left grappling with all that has just happened, traumatized by the betrayal of Beatrix and Musa. Just then, Farah once again materializes, and in this moment of despair gives them some hope by explaining transformation magic. She explains that through making a great sacrifice, the fairies can access this great power. Bloom in Season 1 sacrificed herself by drawing in all the burnt ones, and Aisha in Season 2 by calling the Scrapers to herself. Further, in full transformation, they have access to enhanced powers. Here is where I would work in an in-universe equivalent to fairy dust, that allows them to undo spells or return things to the natural order.
Return to nature!
And so to test this, Aisha and Bloom, under Farah's guidance, restore Flora's powers to her. From here on out, my vision for Farah in the story is a combination of Faragonda and Daphne, based on this scene which reminded me of this one. So inspired by this, I propose that Farah remain in the story as a blend of Faragonda and Daphne, an older guiding figure with special links to the main character, showing up every now and again as a spirit to help the girls on their mission to release the fairies trapped in the Black Circle and defeat Sebastian. The season ends with Bloom entering the Black Circle to escape rearrest with the intention of finding these fairies. So yes, that is it. I know, it's a little crazy. I hope I didn't mix the Winx canon up too much for your taste. I certainly was pushing my own boundaries. Once again, this is just me messing around going crazy because I've got essays to procrastinate on. It's not how I think the season should have been done, it barely qualifies as criticism. I pull some of these ideas out of nowhere, mainly because people seem to enjoy the idea of a Season 4 adaptation in the comments of my last Fate rewrite. But none of it matters anymore, because... Look, yeah, I'm evidently not Fate's biggest fan, but I still like the cast, I enjoy the potential, and I respect the effort behind it. This is getting ridiculous now. I know the cancellation was apparently not Rainbow's decision, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Straffy was displeased already with Season 1, so it's not a surprise. But this falls into a pattern with Rainbow's Winx ventures. I'm super pessimistic about this new film venture, and I know I'm not the only one. I really don't trust Rainbow, I really don't trust whatever American studio that might pick it up. I'm worried we're going to get Monster High 2.0. However, around the fandom, I have seen that one of the reasons for the pessimism is that people really don't think that the story of Winx would lend itself to the big screen, and I completely disagree. I actually think Winx's original arc is perfectly suited to the film franchise model, and Winx under the right circumstances has perfect cinematic universe potential. So perhaps if you still trust me with the Winx canon after this mess, I might make a video or two on how you could adapt Winx into a CU, what I would like to see in it, what lessons we could take forward into this new venture. Let me know if you would be interested in that. And as usual, I have plenty cooking up for you, so I hope you look forward to all of that, and I see you next time. Bye!